her hard work, I don't think we'd be here. And I would like to thank Dr. Garcia for such a wonderful and generous introduction. I don't think I deserve all of that, but you did it anyway. And I want to thank you all for being here. As most of you know, I am Pierre. I was born in Haiti. I moved here in 1993 for many political and economic reasons. So today I'm going to be sharing with you the content of this book, which took me about 2 years to write. I figured I would begin by telling you a little bit about the reason that led me to write this book and the process that led to its materialization. But before doing so, I think it's important for me to make a statement. That is, writing this book was the most challenging experience that I could have ever had as a black man. When I was writing this book, I found myself confronting my own maleness, which was not easy to confront, right? What do I mean by that? While I was writing it, I found myself reconstructing my memories of maleness, homophobia, and of course racism and so on. While I was in the midst of confronting my own maleness, I discovered things that I've done to women that was absolutely hurtful, and I'm not proud of those things. But one thing I must say though, I learned how to be a man, and by learning how to be a man, I ended up reproducing some of sexist behavior that I acquired from my father to begin with. Because believe it or not, all the behaviors that we acquired them first and foremost at home. That's where I learned how to be a man. Not only from my dad, but also from my mom. In my neighborhood, I also learned how to be a boy, to be a strong boy. That is, you cannot cry, you have to repress your emotions. In order to be a man, you have to have more than 2 girlfriends, otherwise you will not be qualified to enter the category of man. Right? So my journey started in Haiti, but it did not end there. It continues to be happening here in the US. So I guess I can tell you more about my first lived experience with maleness, homophobia, sexism, racism as I go along. Now I want to share with you the reason that led me to write this book. Back in 2006, while I was finishing my advanced graduate certificate in women's studies, I took a class with a woman named Anne Ferguson, who's queer, who's a feminist and activist. For her class, I said to her that I want to do a project on masculinity, which I ended up not doing. Instead, I did a project on the socio-economic condition of Haitian women. In this project, I address issues such as sexism, capitalism. By capitalism, I'm referring to corporations that go to Haiti to build factories where the women were being oppressed. So that's what I ended up doing for my project. But that wasn't enough, really, to inspire me to write this book. My partner, whom I would call a feminist, often challenged my male behavior. And of course, as men, we don't want to admit and confront our male privileges, right? Because privileges are not something that anybody wants to confront, whether it's male, white, heterosexual privileges. We don't want to admit them. But it's easy just to pretend that we don't have those privileges, right? But after I took that class and being challenged constantly by my wife, I decided I have to do something. I think that I have to sort of liberate myself from my male oppression, so to speak. Because I believe liberation began first and foremost with oneself, to be more precise, with one inner self. You cannot liberate people if you don't liberate yourself. So I said, in order for me to talk about those issues, first I need to do my part, that is to really talk about my struggle dealing with my male privileges. So, in January 2008, while I was sitting with my wife in a tiny living room, I said to her that, you know what, it's about time for me now to write about masculinity, which I've been wanting to write about, but again, my male privilege is preventing me from doing so. So, of course, she encouraged me to pursue that project. So with that in mind, I started inviting people to take part in it. At first, I wanted to write a book that focuses mostly on my experience with maleness, homophobia, sexism, and racism. But knowing the danger of a single story, to use a very famous Nigerian writer's phrase, Adishi, knowing the danger of the single story, I decided to invite people to take part in this book. So I invited 50 men of African descent to share the stories. Because I think it was important for me to make sure that the reader has access to not one single story, but multiple stories in multiple voices. That's how I invited men from diverse backgrounds in terms of social class, sexual orientation, so on and so forth. Some of the men are college professors, university professors, others are high school and college dropouts. Others are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and some of them are transgender, transsexual. And I wanted to make sure that the reader has a sense of what it's like to be a man among different groups, right? So that's what led me to invite people from different backgrounds. So what I'm gonna do here is to read some of the male privileges that I think I have, and many other men have, by virtue of being first male and heterosexual. Of course, the list, I only listed 40 privileges. I'm not gonna read all of them, I'm gonna read a few. Some of the privileges that I have as a heterosexual man are the following. Not having to be concerned about getting paid a lot less than my coworkers for the same amount in kind of work that I do. Not feeling that I have to be assertive and vocal so that I will not be invisible in the eyes of some of my male coworkers, colleagues, partners, bosses, friends, and even family members. Not being expected to be sexy, slim, and beautiful in order to please my partner, my spouse, or men in general. Not being concerned about being beaten by my spouse or partner at home just because I'm a woman. In terms of my heterosexual privileges, I don't have to be concerned about being murdered on the street, or by a group of gay haters because of my sexual orientation. I don't feel I have to be forced to move from one state to another, or from a city to a city, to find a place where I can marry the partner that I love and live peacefully as a citizen. But I have to fight constantly with the legal system for equal protections and equal rights because of institutional discrimination against people with my sexual orientation. And finally, not having to commit suicide because I'm depressed, isolated, and afraid to open up to my parents and friends, telling them that I'm different, that I'm not the straight person they assume that I am. Of course, I could go on and on and on and on and on and tell you some of the privileges that I feel that I have as a heterosexual black man. But at the same time, I must point out that the same thing that I just listed, the same oppression that I listed in this book, I, as a black man, have been victim of those oppressions by virtue of being a black man. This is why I think it's important when we talk about one form of oppression, we need to link it to other forms of oppression because they are all intertwined. Classism, racism, heterosexism, ableism, they all intertwine. We cannot talk about sexism without linking it to racism, for example. All women are oppressed, right? But women of color are more oppressed than white women because white women have their white privileges. All men benefit from sexism, right? But there's a class issue that is involved. The man in the ghetto is not the same man who's living in suburb. I am not the same man as Barack Obama, for example. And worse yet, men living in the ghetto are not the same as Barack Obama because Barack Obama has class privileges that they don't have. So it's meant for me to point this out. So let me briefly tell you the structure of the book before I go on to read some quotes from my informing stories. The way I structured this book is the following. So for each chapter, at the end of each chapter, I present the case studies, right? And for each case study, I provide a short biographical note about the participants so that the reader can have a sense of who they are. Then at the end of all the case studies, I make some comments and make suggestions for classroom teaching practices. As a teacher, I think it's important for us to address issues, those issues I just mentioned in our classroom, because they impact our students as much as they impact us as teachers, right? I think it's important for us to talk about classism, racism, homophobia, sexism, and you name it in our classrooms, because those issues impact our identity, right? They impact how we see the world, what we do, how we treat others, right? And it's important for us as teachers to address those issues, not to run away from them, because when you run away from those issues, they're going to follow anyway, wherever you happen to be. So we might as well address them in your classroom, or wherever you happen to be as a teacher. So, and at the end of the book, I end the book with an open letter to all men of different backgrounds, whether they are black men, white men, whoever. Because I think men need to start questioning their male privileges and take action. Awareness is not enough. Once you are aware of your privileges, you need to take actions to make things happen, to effect social change. So that's how I structured the book. Now I'm gonna share with you some quotes from the stories that I gathered from this book. As you will observe, I'm assuming you're gonna read the book. The story of the 50-minute wolf and the study illustrate how they've been taught how to perform their maleness. Maleness is all about performance. And to paraphrase you bluntly, maleness is all about performativity, right? We learn how to perform it. We were not born knowing how to do it. We learn how to do it. For example, a man from Morocco who was born and grew up there claims that, and I quote, women are soft and weaker than men, and that they should obey their husband, stay at home and take care of the children, clean the house and cook. A significant number, and I quote, a significant number of men who took part in the study share that view. Similarly, Joseph, a 27-year-old man who was born in Haiti and grew up here, shares his experience with his father, whom he said is very violent. And I'm gonna read the quote to you. He stated, and I quote, "My dad was a very violent guy. In his mind, what he had to do to be a good father is to be disciplinarian by beating us up, by being mean and tough to me, to my mom, to my sisters and brothers." End of the quote. Likewise, Fritz, a Caribbean man in his early 40s, who was born in Antigua and grew up in Croix, said that as a boy, he was expected to be tough and mean and the breadwinner of the family. And he goes on to say, no matter what, you have to provide for the family. Brothers, sisters, so on and so forth. I'm talking about my own personal experiences as the oldest child to my mother and father. Specifically with my mother, I was looked as the man of the household because after my mom and dad split away, had to be a man in the house. End of the quote. Fritz and Tom have something in common. That is, they all feel like they have to be tough. They have to be mean in order to be like a man. Tom, for example, who is American father, died when he was 5 years old, complained that his mother, who was from Colombia, who's a white Colombian, never understood what he was going through at his high school as a man of color. He stated, and I quote, "My Colombian mom was brought up in the States, so he had she had some kind of understanding of how race plays out in the US system. But she did not really understand the intricacies of racism. So there were times when I come home and I explained to her that at school there were teachers that did not expect much of me. I explained that to her, but she didn't really understand. My cousin would tell me that what I needed to do is to man up. He was sort of my immediate role model. He was about 5 years older than me, so he was the one that said, this is what you need to man up. End of quote. Along the same line, friends, another African American in his mid-20s stated, and I quote, in high school, there was this image that the ideal man should be a tough guy or a thug. That wasn't me at all, but I noticed that a good portion of the women seemed to be attracted, so that I felt compelled at times to be seen as tough in front of girls. End of the quote. Most of the participants who took part in the study felt that they had to perform a certain type of manliness in order to meet the expectations of the friends, family members, and people in the community. For example, an Afro-Puerto Rican said that, and I quote, everybody, people tell you in different ways, you are a black guy. You're not supposed to cry. Black guy, you're not supposed to be like a sissy or do something women do. I had to be like a man all the time, and it's very difficult for me sometimes. You feel like you have a big pressure on your back. For example, I hear people say, he's white and gay, but it's okay. But if you are a black person, oh, believe me, that's very difficult. You cannot be gay. You're not supposed to be. You got to be strong. End of the quote. Dr. Joe, who's a professor of anthropology, shared a similar story. He was born female, and he changed his sex from female to male. He stated, and I quote, in this society, if you don't identify with the body you were born with, you have to undergo a kind of transition, surgical, hormonal, social, that puts you in another category. Depending on where you are in the black community, the expectation of a black transsexual man is that you keep it in the closet, that you don't let it be known, and you will be okay. End of the quote. But all of the men, I must say, 99.5% of the men had met the male privileges. They all agree that they are privileges compared to women. And some of them say that they would never want to be a woman. They would never want to give up their male privileges. Walt, another Afro-Puerto Rican man in his early 20s said, and I quote, it's been easy for me to act like a man, to be a man. As a man, I have less responsibility than a woman does. I can also do almost anything I want without being criticized. I could do many things without my reputation being at risk. I also don't have to be burdened of having to take care of all the household and child care tasks. I would never want to be a woman. As men, we have a lot of expectations, but women have much more expectations than men do, and they have it much harder. As far as racism is concerned, the informant had similar experiences that they shared with me. Friends with a frustrated tone of voice said, and I quote, as a black man, it's been a challenge for me. Even within the black or African diaspora, I, as an African American, I am made to be seen as a threat and low status symbol to other black or African descended men because of the stereotype and racial hierarchy of America's racially and economically oppressive system. Finally, Alex, along the same line, argued, and I quote, when people see us or see me come into certain places or whatever, they just put this fake smile in their face. And the phone, they can be like, everything sounds good. But as soon as I walked in, the reaction toward me changes because of my skin color. They always feel that if you see a man of color, it's going to be some kind of bad situation. They cannot do a job. There's always going to be an excuse. It's like when they see a black man, it's just automatic. Like I said, it's a strike against us because they only feel some type of resentment or some type of weight toward us because some people haven't brought up the way to understand that people are equals or people should be treated as one. You know, but what I found interesting, out of the 50 men that took part in this study, there's only one man who claims that he hasn't been a victim of racism. He was born in Trinidad and Tobago, he moved to the States to study. When I interviewed him, he was about to finish his PhD in polymer chemistry. He stated, and I quote, "Actually, institutional racism works in my favor, being a black chemist specializing in polymer chemistry. Some of the company are actually looking to hire black polymer chemists because we are in demand. So it actually works in my favor. Although I would rather be hired on the basis of my skill and my experience, not because I'm a black chemist, but that's just the way it is meant for me. Again, personally, I haven't experienced racism. Thankfully, I haven't been exposed to it. But that doesn't mean in the future I would not be. If that happens in the future, I'll try to remain open-minded and try to look at the situation objectively. And not the So, obviously, when you are conducting a research, you cannot dictate what people should share with you in terms of the stories. They should be allowed to say whatever they feel, right? And I found the last informant story that I just shared with you, I found it very naive for a black man to say that, you know, he hasn't been victim of racism. I think because men of color, we breed racism wherever we go. I breed it here. I breed it, you know, in my own classroom. I breed it wherever I happen to be, in the store, wherever. So I found it very interesting that he said that he hasn't faced racism. But I hope that he will never have to deal with it because it's not really fun being victimized because of your race and sexual orientation, so on and so forth. So as I demonstrated throughout this book, sexism is deeply rooted in the patriarchal and capitalist structure of Western society and other societies. Men, regardless of their geographical location, race, social class, religion, linguistic and social backgrounds, are brought into this world to become part of the patriarchal system. This system has molded and ideologically programmed many of them to behave like a man, which in many cases translates into reproducing and maintaining the unequal sexual and gender division that have relegated many women to marginal positions. However, it's worth pointing out that throughout history, women have organized themselves to challenge and transform these oppressive patriarchal system that has objectified many of them and deprived them of adequate resources so that they can advance economically, socially, politically, and in society. With the exception of a few men who have aligned themselves with women who fight against sexism, the majority, especially those who are wealthy, conservative, and politically powerful, have perpetuated the patriarchal system by remaining silent and not taking actions to challenge the privilege that comes with their males. As I noted earlier, all men have benefited from the patriarchal system at various degrees, irrespective of their religion, race, class, ability, sexual orientation, geographical, historical location, cultural, and linguistic backgrounds. Just as sexism is a system that's been oppressive to women, racism remains a structural system that has been responsible for the marginalization of men and women of color. Therefore, as Renan argues, and I quote, it's impossible to represent race discursively without simultaneously situating it in a social structural context. Nor is it possible to organize, maintain, and transform social structure without simultaneously engaging in racial signification. End of the quote. So drawing on Renan's idea, I argue that as long as this racial structure remains intact, both whites and blacks and browns will continue being torn to pieces by fear, despair, physical and psychological violence. Since black and other marginalized groups have been the main victim of this racial structure, they have no other choice but to engage in a consistent ideological, intellectual, cultural, and political battle against it. as historically proven, dominant and oppressive groups have never voluntarily given out the wealth they have accumulated by exploiting subordinate groups. The latter always have to fight for what has been stolen from them. Likewise, if people of color and women want to stop being alienated and exploited, together with their allies, they have to fight for an equal share of the wealth of the world. So I should stop here. Otherwise I would go on and on. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have, but let's make it dialogical. Let's make it